gave a stranger a free haircut. 30 minutes later, she was fired. But the man no one noticed, he changed everything. Who was he, and why did her kindness shake an entire town? Welcome to NT, where everyday kindness becomes unforgettable. Let's begin this journey together. If you ever take a morning walk down South Avenue in Missoula, Montana, you might catch sight of a young woman unlocking the door to a small hair salon. Just as the first sunlight hits the sidewalk, she's holding a steaming cup of coffee, her hair tucked neatly into a bun, and she greets everyone around her with a gentle smile. That woman is Emily Carter, 29 years old, a humble hairstylist whose name nearly everyone in town knows. Emily didn't come from money, but she grew up in a home full of expectations. Both of her parents worked in the medical field, and for years they dreamed of her following in their footsteps. But Emily always leaned towards simpler things. A butterfly hair clip, the scent of shampoo, the intricate braids she practiced after seeing them in old magazines. To her, helping someone feel beautiful and confident was a form of healing, just without a stethoscope. When Emily told her parents she wouldn't be going to college, that she wanted to become a hairstylist instead, they were so disappointed they stopped speaking to her for a while. Her father even asked her point blank, "You're really turning down med school to cut hair?" But Emily never wavered. She believed in her choice, not because it was easy, but because it was honest. After her parents cut off support, she applied for a job at a well-known salon in town called Lux Trim. It was owned by Cynthia Malone, a woman known for her strict rules and sharp focus on profit. The work environment was tough, but Emily quickly became the heart of the salon. Clients loved her, not just because she was precise with scissors, but because she was genuinely warm. She remembered everyone's name, asked about their kids, and had a way of making even the worst days feel a little lighter. And yet, Emily quietly held onto a dream that hadn't yet come true, to open her own little salon, a cozy space filled with warm light and soft music, where customers would feel more like family than appointments on a schedule. She spent many late nights watching tutorials, jotting down styling tips in a tattered notebook, even sketching out a logo for a business she hoped to start one day. But with little income and no financial backing, that dream stayed on paper, a someday she didn't know how to reach. In a place like Missoula, where people know one another's stories, what made Emily memorable wasn't her skill, it was her quiet persistence and her kindness that asked for nothing in return. She was the kind of person you'd go to once for a haircut and find yourself coming back to again and again. Not just for your hair, but for how she made you feel, cared for. That morning, Missoula had a chill in the air. Emily stopped by a small roadside cafe called Bitterroot Coffee Shack, tucked at the corner of Brooks and Reserve, a Saturday morning ritual she rarely missed. She ordered her usual latte and, while waiting, noticed a man standing quietly outside, holding an empty paper cup, staring off toward the horizon like he was searching for something, or someone. That man's name was Frank Delaney. Frank looked to be in his early 40s, tall and lean, with a faded backpack slung over one shoulder and a thick winter coat that had clearly seen better days. His beard had grown long, his hair was tangled like it hadn't seen a brush in weeks. Emily recognized him immediately, not because they'd ever spoken, but because, well, who in Missoula hadn't heard of Frank Delaney? Frank was a former infantryman who had served nearly 8 years in Afghanistan. He rarely talked about what he'd seen over there, but folks around town often whispered stories. Like the time he drove through a minefield and lost 3 of his squad mates in a single afternoon. After that, the nightmares started. People would see him sitting alone on park benches late at night. Dark circles under his eyes, hands trembling, always flinching at the sound of a bus horn or a sudden bang. The war had ended for everyone else, but not for Frank. Post-traumatic stress made it hard for him to hold down a job. Whenever a customer raised their voice or slammed a door too hard, Frank's body would stiffen, like he was bracing for an explosion. Employers didn't want someone who was always on edge, and Frank didn't have the strength anymore to explain that he was doing his best just to stay afloat. His wife couldn't take it anymore. One day, she left her wedding ring on the kitchen table and walked out. Frank didn't chase her. Since then, he kept to himself. Never begged, never complained, just wandered Missoula like a quiet shadow, as if part of him never really came home. Emily had never spoken to him before, but when she looked into his eyes that morning, she saw something achingly familiar. The kind of loneliness that comes from being left behind by the people who once meant the most. The kind of feeling she'd once known too. She stepped forward and offered a soft smile. "Hi, Mr. Frank, I'm Emily. I work at Lux Trim, the salon down the street." Frank turned toward her, startled for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Oh, hi there. Nice to meet you." Emily gestured to the coffee cart. "I was about to grab another cup. Want something?" "My treat." Frank waved his hand quickly. "Oh no, I wouldn't want to be a bother." "Come on, Mr. Frank," she said gently. "It's cold out here, and a hot cup of coffee's better than 100 polite words." He hesitated, then nodded. Emily turned back to the stand and ordered a second black coffee. She paid for both and handed his over without making a fuss. They sat down on a nearby wooden bench. The conversation was light, a few casual questions, a couple of chuckles, small nods here and there, but even those few minutes were enough to clear away some of the fog in Frank's eyes. As their cups began to empty, Emily looked over at him and said, "If you're free this afternoon, why don't you stop by the salon? Let me give you a haircut, no charge." "I insist." Frank blinked in surprise. "Really?" "Really," she smiled. "Consider it a thank you for this morning's chat." He didn't answer right away, but then something flickered across his face. A faint smile, soft and quiet. The kind of smile that made Emily feel like, for the first time in a long while, someone had reached a part of Frank that the world had forgotten. "Do you remember the last time you were kind to someone, with no reason at all? If so, drop one word in the comments. Kindness." That afternoon, the chill lingered in the air outside, but inside Lux Trim the salon felt warmer than usual. Emily had just finished trimming a bob cut for one of her regulars when the front door opened gently. The small bell above it gave a soft ring, and Frank Delaney stepped in. He wore the same worn coat from that morning, but he had smoothed down his hair and adjusted his collar. There was still a hint of hesitation on his face, but it was clear he'd made an effort. Emily smiled gently and gestured toward the waiting chair. "You actually came," she said softly. "I'm really glad." The energy in the salon shifted ever so slightly. A few of the women getting their hair done looked up and noticed Frank. They recognized him. Of course they did. No one said anything. One woman gave a polite nod. Another just looked away. Emily felt the tension, but ignored it. She had work to do, and someone to care for. As soon as her previous client left, she quickly grabbed a fresh cape, comb, scissors, and neck strip. "I'll have you looking sharp again in no time," she said with a reassuring smile. Frank gave a quiet nod, his lips curling into the faintest smile. As Emily began to carefully trim the longer, tangled parts of his hair, he murmured, "It's been a long time since someone's touched my hair, and not because I was going through airport security." They both laughed. Really laughed. In that moment, they weren't a stylist and a homeless man. They were just two people. A young woman doing something kind and a man who hadn't felt seen in years beginning to remember what that felt like. But then came the sharp, unmistakable sound of heels clicking against the floor. Emily glanced up at the mirror, and just as she expected, Cynthia Malone, the salon's owner, walked in through the back door. She wore a soft pink blazer, held a stack of papers against her side, and had the same expression she always did, perfectly painted lips pressed tight, eyes scanning the room like a hawk. Cynthia didn't speak. She didn't have to. Emily could feel her disapproval from across the salon. Still, she kept her focus on Frank's haircut, refusing to break rhythm. Instead of walking into her office like she usually did, Cynthia dragged a chair across the floor and sat down, directly across from Frank, staring at him in silence. She didn't ask who he was, didn't smile, didn't pretend. 15 minutes passed. The haircut was nearly done. Emily shaved his beard clean, brushed the trimmed hair from his neck, and gently removed the cape. Frank looked years younger. He stood, his eyes soft with gratitude, about to speak, when Cynthia finally broke the silence. Her voice was cold, clipped, and cutting. "How much does this gentleman owe for his haircut?" Frank turned, caught off guard. Emily quickly stepped forward, speaking calmly but firmly. "He's my guest today. You can take it out of my paycheck, ma'am." Cynthia narrowed her eyes. "This isn't a charity, Emily. If he can't pay, then you don't need to come back tomorrow." Frank froze. "No, that's not necessary. I can..." Emily gently cut him off. "It's okay, Mr. Frank, go ahead. I'll catch up with you later." Frank hesitated, then slowly turned and walked toward the door. Just as quietly as he'd entered, the soft bell rang again as it closed behind him. But this time, there was no warmth in the sound, only a heavy silence that settled like dust in the air. Cynthia stood up, her voice sharp as a knife. "You're fired. Gather your things and leave." Emily didn't argue. She didn't cry or plead. She simply bent down and began sweeping up the strands of hair on the floor, the same way she always did at the end of a long shift. Calm, steady, dignified. Outside, Frank Delaney didn't speak a word. He slowly pulled the strap of his worn backpack over his shoulder, tightened it with tired fingers, and began walking toward the small park where he usually spent his afternoons. But today, something was different about his face. It wasn't just that his beard was gone or his hair trimmed. Something inside him had cracked. He wasn't angry. He was hurt, because for the first time in years, someone had been kind to him, and that person had been punished for it. Frank wasn't the type to post on Facebook. He didn't make calls unless it was to the corner grocery store. But today he did both. Not to complain, not to stir trouble, just to tell the truth. "A young woman gave me a free haircut today. She was fired for it. I don't know what else to do except let people know what happened." He sent that message to a small local Facebook group called Missoula Kindness Circle, a place where people shared stories of compassion, good deeds, and the little ways they looked out for each other. Within 45 minutes, Frank's post had over 300 shares. Darlene, a mother who once brought her son to Emily's chair, reposted and added, "Emily once gave my daughter a hair clip when she was crying. Now she's been fired for doing the right thing." The guy who ran the sandwich shop at the end of the block commented, "She once let me pay later when I lost my wallet. No one should lose their job for being decent." The story spread like wildfire. From one local shop to another, across text threads and street corners, through whispered conversations and bold reposts. In a town like Missoula, news doesn't need headlines, just heart. That afternoon, a quiet crowd began to form outside Luckstrom. They didn't shout, they didn't block the sidewalk, they just stood there, holding handmade signs that read, "We stand with Emily. Kindness is not a crime. Bring her back, or we walk." From behind the glass, Cynthia Malone watched them. Her face was unreadable, like stone, but her eyes darted quickly, scanning familiar faces. Longtime clients, loyal customers, people she'd once greeted by name. Some canceled appointments on the spot. Others walked in just to ask for their deposits back. The sky over Missoula stayed gray that day, but no one seemed to feel the cold, because in less than an hour, something rare had happened on that quiet street. An uprising not of protest, but of solidarity. They weren't there to yell. They were there to stand, to show support for a young hairstylist who had lost her job for doing something decent. People brought signs, yes, but also flowers, homemade cookies. A little girl held up a drawing Emily had once helped her color while braiding her hair for a school play. Some folks didn't bring anything at all. They just stood there, as if to say, "I'm here, I see you, and I'm with you." Through that growing crowd, a black SUV pulled to the curb. The back door opened, and stepping out was Mayor Harold Whitman. He wasn't in a suit. He wore a gray overcoat, a scarf, and a calm but determined look. The look of a man who had once worn a uniform beside Frank Delaney in a war zone, and who still knew the difference between right and wrong. He didn't wait for permission. He didn't stop to greet Cynthia. He walked straight into the salon. Inside, Emily was quietly sweeping up the last bits of hair from the floor. The sound of the broom against tile was soft. Until the mayor's voice broke through. "Emily Carter?" She looked up, startled for a moment, recognizing him instantly. "I'm Harold Whitman," he said clearly. "I've heard you were fired today for doing something kind." Before Emily could answer, Cynthia cut in from the back, her tone suddenly sweet, overly controlled. "Good afternoon, Mayor. I think there's been some sort of misunderstanding." The mayor turned to her, expression calm but unwavering. "No explanation needed. I only have one question for Miss Carter." He turned back to the young woman who was now clutching a small cloth tote. "Is it true that you invited Mr. Frank Delaney here and gave him a free haircut?" Emily hesitated, just for a moment. Then she glanced sideways at Cynthia, who was silently shaking her head. The silence signaled to lie, to backtrack, to fold. But Emily didn't. She took a deep breath, lifted her chin slightly, and nodded. "Yes, sir, I did, and I don't regret it." The salon fell completely silent. It was the kind of silence that follows when a stone drops into still water. A pause that ripples out in every direction. Then Mayor Whitman stepped forward. From inside his coat, he pulled out a thick envelope and an official-looking certificate stamped in red. "Then, on behalf of the people of Missoula, I'd like to present you, Emily Carter, with this certificate of humanitarian service, along with a small contribution from the community fund to help you start over. This time, with a salon of your own." Emily's eyes widened. For a moment, she couldn't even find her voice. I don't know what to say." The mayor smiled gently. "Just keep being you. This town needs more people like you." A round of applause erupted, then cheers. "Emily, Emily," echoed like a chant of hope. Emily lowered her head, overwhelmed, tears streaming down her face. Outside the window, Frank stood quietly, hand over his heart, eyes soft with gratitude. 2 months later, on that same stretch of South Avenue, a new sign was hung over a freshly painted storefront. "Hearth and Hair, a salon by Emily Carter." It wasn't the fanciest salon in town. There were no leather chairs, no crystal chandeliers, but the windows gleamed, the walls were warm wood tones, and every chair had a hand-stitched cushion, made by Emily herself. She had used the donation from the community, plus support from a few kind neighbors, to lease a small space that had sat empty for nearly a year. They retailed the floors, brought in new chairs, and fixed up every dryer one by one. Nothing about it was perfect, but everything about it was authentic. On opening day, the shop was full to bursting. There were old clients from Lux Trim. There were strangers who had only heard the story but wanted to book an appointment just to show support. And there were grandparents who brought warm muffins and fresh coffee just because. And sitting in the very first chair was Frank Delaney. He wore a clean button-down shirt, his hair still neat from before, but Emily trimmed it anyway, carefully, like she was working on something precious. Frank smiled without hesitation this time. No shame, no fear, just gratitude. As Emily draped the cutting cape over his shoulders, Frank chuckled. Should I sign the wall or something? First customer gets honorary status, right? Emily grinned. Actually, I have a little plaque ready. Go ahead and sign it, and write today's date, too. The day both of us started fresh. Near the front desk, she placed the mayor's certificate in a wooden frame. Just below it, she set a small glass display box. Inside was an old military medal, a quiet gift Frank had left before he slipped out that day. Etched on the back were the words, "To those who serve without expecting applause." Emily kept it there as a reminder that even though she no longer worked at her old job, kindness never lost its place. It simply found a new home, one with more warmth, more truth. Arth and Hair wasn't just a place for haircuts. It became a place for healing, a place where kindness was the house rule, not the exception. Every month, Emily set aside one full day to offer free haircuts to seniors, single moms, and anyone struggling to get back on their feet. There were no posters, no press, just a small handwritten sign taped to the window. If you need it, it's free today. She hired 2 new employees, a single mother who had lost her job because she had no childcare, and a college senior who'd recently lost his father to cancer. This wasn't just a salon. It was a place where people stood back up. In a small town like Missoula, people connect over coffee shops, morning hellos, and freshly trimmed bangs. But what really binds a community together isn't good service or nice decor. It's quiet kindness, given freely and without condition. The story of Emily Carter and Frank Delaney isn't some grand epic. There are no superheroes, no explosions, just a young woman who chose to do the right thing, even when it cost her everything. And a town that stood up to say, we don't let kindness be punished here. We live in a world where, sometimes, the kindest people are the ones hurt first. But if anyone ever asks, does kindness still matter in this world? The answer is simple. Yes, it does. And it's the most powerful currency we have, one that every single person can afford to give. Emily didn't become rich overnight, but she gained something far more lasting: respect, connection, and a place where her dream could finally live. If you believe kindness still has a place in this world, leave just one word in the comments: kindness. And if stories like this one move you, inspire you, or make you want to believe again, hit like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you don't miss what's next on NT Amazing Stories, where everyday people and quiet moments shine brighter than any headline. Because sometimes all it takes is a single act of kindness to change a life forever. See you in the next story.